friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Katie, this is Life Between Words, and we're talking October reading wrap-up today. I need to put on some lipstick because my lips look like they're disappearing into my face. In the month of October, I finished 9 books. Now, I didn't read 9 books cover to cover. One of them was an audiobook, I believe, and one of them I had started to read in September. But anyway, still, it was a great reading month for me. I'm super proud of myself. I had been in a reading slump, and before that, I don't think I'd ever read 9 books before in a month. So, really a pretty good reading month. Although I have to say, and this exact same thing happened last year in October, I read way too many thriller, horror, mystery books, so it actually ended up putting me into a little bit of a slump again, not a huge one, but I haven't even finished one book in November yet, but another story for another day. Let's talk about the books that I did read in October. Actually, I thought I would do a little bit of a breakdown of my books. So, like I said, I finished 9 books. One of those books got 5 stars. 5 of the books got 4 stars. 2 of the books got 3 stars, and 1 of the books got 2 stars. So, it was a good, solid reading month for me. Total, I read 2,389 pages, but really I read more than that because I read most of the 6th Harry Potter book, and I didn't include A Man Called Ove, even though I was listening to that, because I don't know how many pages of that left I had. I'd say I listened to maybe 45 minutes of it, maybe half an hour this month. So anyway, I finished listening to A Man Called Ove. I had started this audiobook in, I think, July, and because I wasn't listening to it consistently and I kept coming in and out of it, it was really hard for me to focus and concentrate on. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, but I have to say that I feel like I would have liked it even better had I read the physical copy, and I have the physical copy. Here's my physical copy of A Man Called Ove. I like audiobooks, but I find that I have to be in the right mood and I have to set aside time to actually listen. I just don't do that, so sometimes it's just hard for me to listen to an audiobook. I still teared up at the very end of the audiobook, so it still got to me. I still really liked it, so 4 out of 5 stars. Grumpy old man who deep down has a really good heart. That's kind of the story. The first physical book that I finished this month was The Salt House by Lisa Duffy. This is a book about a family who is recovering from the loss of their toddler daughter who died tragically in her crib, which that aspect of the book was so hard for me. I think any parent out there can relate to the fact that once you have kids, it's really hard to read about any child who dies or has something really tragic happen to them, and if that's the central focus of the book, it eats away at your soul just a little bit. It's so hard to read about. This book goes along with kind of that theme of grief that I've been running into in my books the past few months. I gave it about 3 stars on Goodreads, but it really deserves maybe 3.5 stars. While I read this book, I felt like I had a weight at the pit of my stomach. Thankfully, the event of the death itself isn't focused on this book. It's really the grief of the family, how each member of the family is dealing with this grief. This book flips between perspectives. In general, I like books that flip between perspectives. I don't mind getting a lot of different perspectives in books from chapter to chapter, but I'm not sure in this book that it worked really well for me, and so for that reason I didn't give it a higher star rating. I loved the perspective of the 2 parents in this book. I felt like their voices were really powerful, but they also follow the 2 other daughters in the book, and I'm not sure that their voices worked for me, especially the 8-year-old girl. I felt like her voice, it didn't sound like an 8-year-old to me. It sounded too mature. Although every once in a while she'd slip into this voice that sounded too young, so it was like she couldn't quite find the right balance for me that really worked. I didn't mind the teenager's perspective. Her name was Jess in the book, but once again I felt like it just distracted from the more powerful voices of the parents. One thing that I absolutely loved about this book was the setting. It takes place in Maine, and the father in this book is a lobster fisherman, and you can practically taste the salt in the air. It's very atmospheric in terms of the environment, and it was very picturesque. Lisa Duffy also does a beautiful job of making the grief palpable. It's about how a family knits itself back together after an unimaginable tragedy, and I thought that aspect of the book really worked well. Next, I read a thriller called I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid, and this book is probably the most unsettling book I've ever read in my life. Talk about atmospheric. This book is incredibly atmospheric. Not really a whole lot happens. It's basically about this guy and his girlfriend who are going to visit his parents for the first time one night, and she is thinking about ending things. While you're reading this book, you're not quite sure what's going on, and there's a lot of philosophical conversations that happen between the boyfriend and the girlfriend. Once you find out at the very end of the book what happens and what the bigger picture is, it makes you want to perhaps pick this book up again and reread it. So unlike a lot of thrillers, this is a thriller that you could easily reread. Next, I picked up Under the Harrow. I read this with Julie this week. It's by Flynn Barry. This was my 2-star read. This book was really disappointing. It was another thriller, and there just wasn't anything exceptional about it. I didn't hate this book. I thought it was okay. It was an okay thriller. The things I liked about this book, I didn't guess the mystery, and I thought the writing was quite good. But the book meandered way too much. I ended up skimming over some passages, and in the end it didn't even matter because those things had nothing to do with the book. A book that's this short shouldn't meander. This should be very tightly plotted, and it wasn't. Another thing that kind of disappointed me is that there was a lot of character development given the amount of character development that we got. I feel like you should feel some attachment, if not affection, just attachment to the character. You want to feel invested in the outcome, and I really just didn't. This month I also picked up The Wonder by Emma Donoghue, and this will probably be among my top favorites of the year. I loved this book so much. It surprised me how much I liked this book. I kind of expected to enjoy it. I didn't expect to love it. This book tells the story of a young English nurse who was trained under Florence Nightingale. She finds herself in an assignment in Ireland to watch over this young girl who the town claims hasn't eaten in 4 months. One of the reasons that this book kind of surprised me in terms of how much I like it is this. I'm a person of faith and conviction. Miracles are a part of my worldview. I feel like if God wants to keep someone alive for 4 months without eating anything, that's something that could happen. This book, however, does not always portray religion and faith and the people who claim to believe these things in a positive light. A lot of the villains in this book call themselves Christians. And it's true, some of the people in this book are blinded by what they want to be true. They're ignorant and frustrating and on occasion villainous. Their faith isn't pure, but I think there are depictions of faith that are even-handed and even beautiful. The child at the heart of this book has a faith that's incredibly winsome, even if she is being manipulated by the hands of people who are villainous. Lib, the main character in this book, views Catholics as being duped by a myth at the very least, and at the most, incredibly wicked and deceitful. And in at least one case, that's true. The person is wicked and deceitful. But I will say, Lib changes over the course of the book. She starts out that way, but she doesn't end up that way. I would argue that by the end of the book, her character growth allows for some mystery. She doesn't necessarily come to believe the same as some of the people around her, but she at least doesn't view them all as condescendingly as she does at the beginning of the book. The Wonder is not an easy read. Terrible things happen on the page and sometimes off the page, and we just hear about them. It's really gut-wrenching. Yes, the plot moves slowly until the second half of the book. Yes, Lib is incredibly intolerant of Catholicism and the Irish in general, up until probably the later half of the book. The little girl, like I said, who's at the heart of the story, is filled with beauty and tragedy. And it's her. It's this little girl that changes Lib. And I absolutely loved this book because of that. Watching Lib change because of this little girl. I gave it 5 stars. Next, I read The Hot Zone. I read this during Spookathon. It's the only book I think I completed during Spookathon. Spookathon was a huge fail, and I tried to do a readathon vlog of it. For whatever reason, it's not showing up when I plug my phone into the computer. So if I figure it out, maybe you'll get a Spookathon vlog later this month or into December. But anyway, I read The Hot Zone. The subtitle is The Terrifying True Story of the Origins of the Ebola Virus. It's by Richard Preston, and it tells the true story of a time in the United States in the early 90s when there was an outbreak of Ebola on U.S. soil, and how the government and CDC responded to this and ended up containing it. It also delves into what Ebola is and It goes into great detail about Ebola and its sort of sister viruses. It's incredibly graphic, really, really gruesome, and also really scary because it's true. And I remember learning about Ebola when I was in elementary school and becoming absolutely horrified by it. And I didn't even know the half of it then. I didn't understand the complexity of the virus and what it actually did to the human body, and it's really, really a terrifying thing. Basically, I'm not even going to say it. I'm not even going to say it on this video. If you want to know about Ebola, you can research it yourself. It's an awful, awful, awful virus. If you have a strong stomach and you're interested in Ebola, I would recommend this book. It does not read like a nonfiction. It reads like a really fast-paced thriller. It's very good. Another favorite from this month was Career of Evil by Robert Galbraith, aka J.K. Rowling, we all know. This book is the third book in the Cormoran Strike mystery series, and so I can't really say too much about it because it continues on with the story of Cormoran and his assistant Robin. And I loved this book. It was by far the darkest in the trilogy, but I also think it was the best. I think that J.K. Rowling really came into her stride with this book. I will say that it suffered a little bit from having too many suspects. It was a little bit hard to keep track of who was who. There were 3 different suspects that we were following, and they were all from Cormoran's past. But that's my only complaint. Other than that, I thought this book was so good. I really, really, really enjoyed my time reading it. I'm really pleased that I finally caught up in the Cormoran Strike mystery series. I also read another thriller called 6 Stories by Matt something. You can see it on the title when I put it up here. I think it was written because of the popularity of the Serial podcast. So the book is sort of in podcast format. You're reading, every chapter is an episode of the podcast. It's very fun to read. I really enjoyed it. I didn't listen to it on audiobook. That was a lie. I read it on my Kindle. Anyway, it was an ebook. Anyway, doesn't matter. I will say, it's pretty clear who the killer is. However, there is still a huge, huge twist at the end that you don't see coming. So I think it's still worthwhile. It was just a really fun thriller, perfect for October. I really enjoyed it. All right, and finally, at the end of the month, I read The Troop. Technically, I finished this in the beginning of November, but I'm counting it as an October read because I read most of it in October and I don't want to talk about it in November. At this point, I was so sick of horror and thriller, and I think because of that, I just didn't enjoy this as much as I might have. Also, I'm not sure I'm a huge fan of graphic horror novels, and this book was so graphic. I loved the plot. There are parts of this book that are right up my alley. For whatever reason, I know this is weird, I like reading survival stories that take place during a pandemic-like outbreak, and that's kind of what this was. However, it was about this group of kids that were trapped on this island, and they start dying of this horrible virus. And I'm not going to tell you any more than that because I feel like that's kind of part of what happens in the book, is you learn about what is causing this illness. I really liked the plot of it, but it was so graphic. I didn't find it scary. There was one scene at the end that had me pretty creeped out, but the rest of the book I feel like was just gross. I just don't know that I really like that. Now, if you like graphic horror, you will love The Troop. And like I said, there were a lot of aspects of it that I enjoyed. I liked the plot. I liked the characters. I thought that the book was incredibly chilling and unsettling, and that's kind of what I want when I read a horror book, but the gross out stuff was just too much for me. It was just too much. I will also say that this book takes place on Prince Edward Island. The only other book that I've ever read set there is Anne of Green Gables, so to have this be the only other book that I've read set on Prince Edward Island was just a very weird reading experience because I can't imagine 2 more polar opposite books. But there you have it. So those were all the books that I read in October. Tell me about all of your October reads. If you are a thriller reader, did you get sick of thrillers by the end of the month? You guys need to help me. Next year, please remind me at the beginning of October not to just fill my month with thrillers. It was just way too much for me. I just can't handle the stress of reading that many thriller books in one month. It was just too much for me. My heart couldn't handle it. I'm done. I hope you guys all had a great October. I hope you read some great books. I hope you picked up a favorite. I will talk to you guys later. Bye!
Aren't the Halloween books that are scary? They have still a sense of wonder.
I don't know. Harry Potter.
You consider Harry Potter a Halloween?
Yeah.
I guess. No wizards and
They're
witches.
atmospheric and.
It takes place in the fall usually.
Well, it takes place through a whole school year, but
Starting in the fall.
there's something about being at Hogwarts that feels like fall to me.
You
Also
can always
Christmas.
do that next fall.
Yeah, well, I did read part of Harry Potter in October. I was reading.
Just to lighten up the stressful.
Yeah, it was just too much.